As a director, it's your job to create worlds. It's not your job to just, telling the story is part of it, but telling your story through a specific point of view and a very single, eye that's taking you through the world, the atmosphere, the subjective and objective nature of the storytelling. This is your job as a director, and a lot of that is in the image itself. And a lot of directors ignore the image. They treat the image as a secondary part to the dialogue and to the actual setup of how actors talk to each other. I think that when I was in my early teens, and New York City was a very different place. 42nd Street was largely sex industry and drug dealing. But there were some very unique movie theaters that a friend of mine and I, my best friend in high school, and actually before high school, we were like 12, 13, we would sneak into this theater that had two theaters, one marquee, two theaters. One theater showed porno films, and the other theater showed European art films. And the other theater had a whole series of Bergman movies that they were showing. And I remember seeing Seventh Seal when I was like 14, and it just blew my mind. I just didn't know that movies could be so deep and thoughtful, and it just make me think about what I had just seen for so many days. Because normally when you went to a summer box office film when you're that age, you just forget about the film 2 days later, and it's not that important in your life. But these films became important, and that really fascinated me. And I think what really did it is when I was 16, I read The Birth of Tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche, because it was his thinnest essay. So I figured, all right, I'll try reading this, and since it's only 95 pages, it just blew my mind. It just opened my eyes to a whole new way of looking at what tragedy is, but also what art really is. That art is something there to transform you and to take you, out of the everyday, out of your habitual, unconscious sense of life, and into something hyper-real, into something, foreign, so that suddenly, you became involved in everything you're looking at, everything that you're hearing, everything that you're sensing. And this became something important to me because I started to look around, and I didn't see much of Nietzsche's ideas in The Birth of Tragedy expressed in the movies that I was watching, but I did see it in painting, especially in 19th century painting of Caspar David Friedrich, and you look at like the symbolists like Gustave Moreau and those guys, they were creating this kind of religion of beauty in their work, and that really fascinated me, this very ritualistic sensibility towards art and ideas that seemed to have more of a timeless quality than something that was born out of a particular era or age of ideas. My experience with things that I wasn't familiar with became those things that became important to me, if that makes any sense to you. It does. And so I started to examine life differently, just because a poem that takes you out of the familiar, and makes you look at things in ways that you wouldn't look at it before, to me, that's what life is about. It's why it's why we have best friends. It's why we have people that we hang out with, because we want to have these experiences and learn from one another and hopefully build off of that into something else, Most of art is mimicry and copying, some reality that we all understand. But to really take that into an original place and deconstruct it and recreate it into something original, you have to be comfortable with being alone, and you have to be comfortable with being able to really trust yourself in a way where you're not overthinking and shooting yourself in the foot by overthinking. So it's a very delicate line of being able to be comfortable with being alone and to create from that place of not thinking too hard about the purity of what it is that is emerging out of you. If you're not going to be a surgeon that saves someone's life, then being a shaman who takes someone out of the familiarity of their life and introduces them into something magical and hyper-real that allows them to mirror and examine their own lives in a new way, that in itself becomes a kind of psychic surgery, and you begin to be a healer. You know, I think great art heals us because it liberates us. It makes us realize that we're not alone in whatever freaky feelings we have about life or ourselves, and that there are some things that we can't see that really do exist and are palpable and are really there. And I mean, imagine going through life without any music. I mean, imagine going through life without being able to feel your emotions outside of yourself singing back to you. I got really ill after Suspect Zero, and it wasn't a disease. It was an illness that was genetic, and it was very hard to diagnose, so it took years to figure out what was actually wrong and then to be able to fix it. It ended with me needing a liver transplant because from the time I was born, my liver, as it regenerated new cells, regenerated cells less perfectly with each new generation. So by the time I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was getting quite sick. I just thought I was just getting older, and that's what getting older felt like. But so a few years ago, I had a liver transplant, and my brother actually saved my life by giving me 450 grams of the left lobe of his liver, which is now 1,600 grams, because the liver regenerates and grows. And now I've never been healthier in my life. So now I have this enthusiasm of the same guy that when I, was making Begotten, and now I just want to push the limits in the envelope of cinema and, opera and all the things that I love, and just take everything and push it to its furthest limit and really excite my audience with new works. And so I feel good. So you're actually interviewing me at a point where I am just now getting back out there as a director and as somebody who has a lot of beautiful stories to tell and is looking forward to telling them.